Retro. We're going to talk a little bit about Half-Life and Half-Life 2 configuration files. A little brief history. Half-Life 2, 20 years old. Older than that. We had the Half-Life 2 anniversary last year. There was a lot of commotion on YouTube and I'm sure other places as well. And rightfully so. We have Half-Life 2 RTX coming out soon. I believe there's a playable demo coming out on the 18th. If you rewind, when the games first came out, you were able to play around with the configuration files, just like any other game. Half-Life, Half-Life 2. And then you had Blue Shift, Opposing Force, and of course Half-Life 2 Deathmatch. There were several mods over the years. At one point there was the Orange Box update, which broke stuff in Deathmatch, and it didn't allow you to use some of the things that you had put into your configuration files. Then there was another update at some point after that, and it like messed around with the bunny hopping technique that some people were using in the configuration files. And fast forward to last year, and there was the Half-Life 2 anniversary update, which had a lot to do with, the anniversary, and they wanted to update the games because I'm pretty sure this is a precursor to something new coming out in the near future. We can hope Half-Life 3. I'm not sure if that's what it's going to be, but we definitely had a big update. But what I notice is you can still use the same configuration files from when the games first came out for the anniversary update or updates for Half-Life and Half-Life 2 or the Steam Deck updates. It's pretty wild. I'm kind of interested to see if the Half-Life 2 RTX release allows me to use the same configuration file. But in the meantime, and it's simple. So Half-Life, which is the original Half-Life, right here in your Half-Life, in your Valve folder, that's the original Half-Life game. That's this. You're gonna see a config. Let me see. And then you're gonna see an autoexec config, but this is not the same as the autoexec config for Half-Life 2. So Half-Life, the first game, uses what they call a user config, which is that's the one that you would want to put your stuff in if you wanted to modify anything in the game. In Half-Life 2, let's say we go to, I think it's config? No. Half-Life 2 config. In Half-Life 2, instead of a user config, it uses an autoexec config. Same thing. And you can change what you want here. But it's interesting because a lot of the settings are the same. And you can use the same configuration file. You can use the same user config for anything related to Half-Life 1. And you can use the same autoexec config for anything related to Half-Life 2. And that's what I'm going to show you. And once you run the config just once, you will rename it, throw an underscore in front of it so it doesn't load it anymore. And then you can go into the anniversary updated or Steam Deck updated versions of the games, and then set your settings in there, and it'll stick over your configuration files. So let's say, okay, Half-Life. So Half-Life, the original game, which is here, is going to be in your Half-Life and then Val folder. And that's going to be your user config. So anything you want to change, you'll change in here. I don't bind default FOV 100 anymore because the update does that for you. I have the cheats in here. I can't remember if I tried those on the update, but I put them in here. This is keypad delete, which is the period on the numeric keypad. So we'll test that and see if that works. But for the most part, you can bind your weapons. Here's an alias show graph, netgraph 3 and netgraph 0 if you want. Hit the space bar, pause it, throw that into your config. It's pretty cool. It works for Half-Life 2 also. And it works for all the mods, for everything. And then here, again, if you want to hit spacebar and just see how I have all this set up, basically it's just, like frames and graphics and mouse settings, but again, you can change that in the game. And let's say you have your user config and you're happy with it. You can take this, any Half-Life game where you see a config and a default config, you can use you can set up your user config file, and you can literally just drag this, like blue shift. See where it says config, default config? You can literally take the same user config that you set up for Half-Life 1, just drag it to blue shift folder, or drag it to Gearbox folder. This is blue shift. Gearbox is opposing force. So the original 2 official mods was blue shift and opposing force. So here's blue shift, and then Gearbox is opposing force. You can see it's got the green icon. Here's blue shift, blue icon. So yeah, you can just go set up your user config, which is here. Set it up the way you want it. Do whatever you want to do in here. Just drag that to blue shift or drag that to Gearbox. You can also drag that to, okay, where is it at in Half-Life Caged? Let's say you have a mod, Half-Life Caged, for example, which is Half-Life 1. You would just look. Like here's the config. See this? You could drag that same file, that same user config file, to that folder. Anywhere that it says config. And then use your configuration file settings. Again, Half-Life 2, same thing. Half-Life 2, you would go to the HL2 folder, which is Half-Life 2. Go to your CFG folder. And instead of a user config, it'll be an autoexec config. Anything Half-Life 2 related is an autoexec config. Set it up the way you want. Here's your cheats, hit spacebar. You can set it up however you want. Here's your bunny hop. And we have the autoexec config and the user config. I have mine set up. But let's say you go to Half-Life, hit play. Now it doesn't matter. You can put a new game. You could load a game. This was a mod I was playing around with. Just load it up. Now it's using any of the options that I had, and you'll see like anything that I didn't have bound is not there. Anything that I had in here, everything that I have bound, because I unbound everything in the config. My mouse settings, and if I hit tab and you look on the bottom, you see where I have it set up where it shows the graph. It shows my frames, my in, my out, my loss, my choke. If you were online playing, you would see that. If I hit delete on the numeric keypad, I now have every weapon. That's my cheat. So that's Half-Life 1. And then so when you come out of the game, and now you go back to your user config, you can just rename it. And when you don't want it to activate, what I just do is shift underscore. And now it won't run the user config when you load the game. It'll keep all the settings from the user config, but now you can override the settings. And you'll see I still have the graph on the bottom if I want when I hit tab. But now I can go into options and I can change any setting in here and apply it, and it'll automatically just write it to the game file itself. I don't know, what is this video? And you'll see display mode widescreen. That's why we don't need the FOV anymore. Wait for vertical sync, and then all of this just overwrites it. And then you can just go from there. You don't need to use the user config anymore. So let's say if you wanted to play around with like your mouse sensitivity, you can. And then if you change any settings after that, because you're not using the user config anymore, it'll write it to your config. And you'll see it has unbind all because that's what I had it set to. But if I set it in the game, it'll save it. And it's the same, like if I wanted to go into blue shift, and I don't have a user config in here. But let's say I went into Valve, I took my user config, and I just dropped it, I copied it into blue shift. So now you'll see it's here, so I'm going to rename it and get rid of the underscore. So now if I run blue shift, it should run the user config, the same exact one that I used for for the original Half-Life. And if I hit tab, you'll see in the bottom, here's my graph. And if I hit delete on the numeric keypad, there's my cheats. And you can do that with any Half-Life 1 game. And it's the same thing. Go into Blue Shift, go to the user config. I mean, you can just delete it as long as you have a copy saved. And it'll save it. Half-Life 2, same thing. Half-Life 2, HL2. Half-Life 2, HL2 is Half-Life 2. In there, you go to your config. Now, instead of user config, it's autoexec.cfg. Same thing. You can set up whatever you want here. Here's your graph. Weapon. Here's the cheat. If you want to see how to... Here's the cheat. Here, let's save that. For Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2, Steam Cloud out of date. Yeah, okay. And you'll see it's got the anniversary update. You know what I mean? Like if I'm using a controller. So let's go to Half-Life 2. Load a game. Okay, so here I am. My mouse is... So I need to change the mouse. But I don't want to change the mouse right now because I'm using the autoexec config. And if I change it, it's going to unbind it and put it back to what's in the autoexec config. So, what I could do is hit tab, and you'll see, there's my net graph. And if I hit, I don't know if it'll let me cheat. Yeah, it'll let me cheat. So, this is basically the exact same configuration file that I wrote for the original Half-Life 2 when it first came out. And then what you would do is come back here, go to your autoexec config, and rename it. Again, put an underscore, and now it won't run it. And now any changes that you make in the game will save to the configuration file. Not the default configuration file, but the configuration file. Half-Life 2 load game, same thing. Go to the same one. Okay, and you'll see here's my mouse. Now I'm going to go in and go to options, go to mouse sensitivity. I don't know, let's go to 2.5. That's a little better. Right? Is that my flashlight? I don't know where I have the flashlight bound to. But you'll see, okay, so I changed the mouse to 2.5. So now let's go back and let's quit. Now if I go back in the game, because I'm not running the autoexec, let's go back in the game. And let's go to Half-Life 2. Let's load the game just for the hell of it. And now if we go to Options, Mouse, you'll see the sensitivity saved. Because now it's not running the autoexec config anymore. And there you go. And do I still have cheats? Yes, because the autoexec config wrote it. And the original config of the game is not going to change it because there are no settings in the actual game that turn cheats on or off. So even though you have the autoexec configuration file disabled, it's still written to the Half-Life 2 configuration file, which you can now overwrite with settings right here from in the game. Pretty neat. And of course, just like I explained with Half-Life 1, you can take this autoexec config file and you can use it for Half-Life 1 Episode 1, Half-Life 1 Episode 2, go to Episode 2, go to Config, throw your autoexec config in here. You could use the exact same one. Run it, come out of the game, disable it. It works for the Half-Life 2 update that came out. Go to the HL2 folder, go to config, and here's your autoexec config. Right? The update. Config. Does it use a user? No, I'm pretty sure it uses an autoexec config. Pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah. I just don't have anything in here for it right now. Half-Life 2 update. Here's Half-Life 2 year-long alarm. I think Episode 2. It's a mod for Episode 2. So you would go to the Episode 2 folder, the config folder, and then you would just throw it in here. Right? Or would it be in here? I'm pretty sure it would be in here. Yeah, because it's like config. Year-long alarm config? No, it would be in here. Yeah, if you would go into the year-long alarm, you always want to look for this. Config. Yeah, see? And so on and so forth. So let's just close that. And that's how you would use your configuration files for Half-Life 2. It'll work for Half-Life 2 Deathmatch. Even though it has, and of course you don't want to cheat in Deathmatch, it's online multiplayer and you'll probably get kicked out of servers, but you can set up all your settings in the autoexec file for the Deathmatch, and and I mean, if you go into a server where they allow you to have certain settings, because there are servers, like I know my friends have them, where you can set up your own settings and go in, and if it's anything they don't allow, it overwrites your config. Come on, Ponzi. Yeah, be a good boy. Anyway, long story short, I'm really hyped to play the RTX when it comes out, and whether or not we can use the same configuration files for it, I'll be hot to try that out and make a video. I will be either streaming or recording a complete playthrough of Half-Life 2 RTX. It's one of my favorite games of all time, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks for listening to me ramble and rant. as usual, weekend's on the way. Everyone stay safe. And don't drive drunk. Please. Like and subscribe.